Hi, Taylor. Welcome to Thought of You.
Hi, Amelia.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be here with you and happy 2025, which right before we started recording this, we discovered is officially the 20th anniversary of our favorite Fergie song, My Humps.
Happy anniversary. Happy 2025. This made me think of the funniest experience I've ever had with Fergie, also my only experience with Fergie in person. I was at the All-Star game and the NBA All-Star game. And I don't know if she was trying to have a comeback for whatever reason. She was performing the national anthem, and she tried to make it really sultry. And I'm
Yikes.
tears are welling in my eyes right now. Please look up the videos. We will include the video of this, but all of the players were holding back laughter. Everyone in the stands was like, "What is going on?" Also holding back laughter. And you have to see the zoom in of the players' faces where they're biting their lips, clearly trying not to start laughing at her performing the national anthem. And every once in a while, it goes viral again on the internet, and I relive that moment all over again.
You were there live. I am imagining like Marilyn Monroe singing Happy Birthday to JFK, but it's like Fergie at an NBA game singing the national
It is
anthem. Is that the
exactly
vibe?
that. It's that, but if JFK was laughing at Marilyn Monroe or actively
Ugh.
trying not to laugh.
Yikes. Cringe is like not my favorite type of comedy. Like, I really don't like embarrassing moments. Like, humiliation is not one of my kinks. It makes me so uncomfortable. So, I probably would have hated every second of living that live, but I'm really glad that you got to be there. And now we get to celebrate the 20th anniversary of My Humps.
I love this for us.
So it is the beginning of 2025, and we are here on our respective mics launching a new podcast. I'm wondering if you want to like give folks a little background on how Thought of You came to be before we dive in.
Yeah, we had been talking about doing a podcast related to another project. And then this kind of organically happened. We realized we are the type of friends who just really like to have a project together. And one of our most recent projects, the Lifestyle Business League, ended. And we were like, wait, we want to talk to each other. And we keep having these conversations where we're talking about articles, we're constantly sending links to each other. And we realized, hey, we could have a podcast where we're talking about these things. Literally, I'm the more verbose one of the two of us, but I'm sending you a 5-minute voice note about something. That's already a podcast. Let's just make it official.
Yeah, I feel like this podcast is just like a public facing version of our Signal chat where we are constantly sending these things back and forth. And I also feel like as two people with a lot of prominent Capricorn placements, we like our favorite way to be friends is to work on projects together. So, of course, this was eventually going to manifest into a podcast since podcasting is basically what I do full time. And you have had podcasts for years and years and years. So it's a real treat to get to do this. And I will also tell listeners for some accountability for all of us that our goal for this is for it to be fun and not perfect. We are releasing perfectionism. Both of us spend a lot of time being like very polished and well spoken in public. And this is where we are going to quote unquote wild out.
Yeah, this is us letting our hair down. This is exposure therapy for being imperfect. I'm going to stumble on my words because I'm going to get so excited. And Amelia's not going to edit it out all the time because that's not what this is about. This is about you getting to be kind of in our group chat, in the conversation with us, stumbling over words and all.
Yeah. And we're going to release it once a month. And it's going to be, hopefully, we think, kind of long. I was saying before this that we are embracing our Joe Rogan era, which is like a horrible phrase I shouldn't say. But what I mean by that is we're going to let ourselves be long form. We have very different politics and priorities than some of the other long form podcasters out there. But I just feel like if every white man pseudo celebrity, pseudo scientist can have a podcast where they speak for like 90 minutes multiple times a week and people listen to it, then we can have a 90-minute show once a month. Like, I want to give myself permission to take up the audio space that way.
Absolutely. And I was realizing too, I already have one, I love The Read, shout out to The Read, a longer form podcast chat show that I listen to every week. But then I started getting these ones that come out monthly and looking forward to it. So you all will have to tell us on Substack what your accompanying activity is for Thought of You. Maybe it's what you listen to while you're cleaning or grocery shopping, but I definitely hope it has a place in your routine and is something that you look forward to listening to every month, because I already can tell you this is going to be a highlight every month, me getting to record this for you and with Amelia.
Yeah, same. One of my very favorite podcasts is a private show run by my friend Nicole Antoinette, where at the end of every month, her and her friend Julia just hop on and do like Rose Thorn Bud together. And that's what the show is called. It's like very simple, but I look forward to it and I like smash play every time it comes out. I am so thrilled, so excited. I'm the first person in the comments. I like can't get enough of it. And that is the vibe that I'm trying to bring to this function of our show. So I'm really excited for the format and everything we have planned. And just in case folks are new to us, should we like tell them a little bit about who we are? If you've landed here and you're still listening over 5 minutes in, maybe you're curious. Who are these people in my earbuds? Taylor, do you want to tell folks a bit about who you are today?
I love that you framed this. That was you being a good friend of who I am today, because I was like, oh, existential question. Who am I? I'm Taylor Elise Morrison. I have a portfolio career, which means I have multiple things in my career plate. That includes being a PhD student, having a body of work called Inner Workout. I published a book of that name and an app. I'm a coach. I'm a facilitator. I am sometimes a podcaster. I'm stepping back into that with Amelia. And yeah, I just really like to create spaces, whether spaces and tools for people to get closer to themselves and to other people and to what they actually want. So that's me. What about you, Amelia?
Yeah.
Who are you? Who are you today? I will use your same phrasing.
Yeah. So I am lately primarily a podcaster and producer. I have a few popular shows. Probably my most popular podcast is Off the Grid, which is about leaving social media for small business owners. I also have a tarot podcast called My Tiny Tarot Practice. And at the end of 2024, I launched a book podcast called Pleasure Reading. So I have a lot of podcasts. You can find them all at softersounds.studio, where in addition to my own shows, you will also see all of the work that I do with clients. So I'm a full-time podcast editor and producer at Softer Sounds, which is my company. And outside of my work, I like to hang out with my partner JJ and my dog Zoe and my cat Wilco, who will probably make an appearance. If you watch this on YouTube or see the video, she'll definitely show up at some point. And I love to read books, hence my reading podcast. And I am rediscovering how to cook this year. That's one of the big things I'm doing today is like buying groceries for the upcoming week, because it looks like we might get snowed in this weekend, which I'm a fan of. I love being snowed in, hence why I love living in the Midwest. But yeah, I think that's who I am today. Aspiring snowed in podcaster.
And I feel like I have to jump back in because you did such a good job of saying who you are outside of work. And I was just like, this is who I am as a worker, Capricorn Stellium.
Of course.
Who am I outside of work? I also have a very cute dog named Blue, who hopefully will be quiet, but I live in an apartment building. Someone gets too close to the door. He has something to say about it. It's been over a year now. I started dancing again, and I dance twice a week doing ballet and modern. That's been really fun. And I have a great partner, Matt, who, is conveniently staying out of the house as we record this to make sure that he doesn't upset Blue by coming back in. And I also like to read a good amount. Because I just started grad school last year, I'm finding that balance of, does reading feel fun if I already have to read so much for school? So TBD on that.
Yeah, for sure. That reminds me, I should maybe mention that I have a PhD in philosophy. I can get a little esoteric at times. But that's part of the fun and why I love talking to Taylor, because we are both like students at heart, I would say, and we're not like invested in academia as a culture or a work or a job, but we love asking questions and we love really digging into the research and like reading what other people think and unpacking that together. So we will be doing a lot of that on the show. I think we will be doing our own version of philosophizing as we move through all the things that we've brought to talk about today and beyond. So should we move into our kind of opening segment, Taylor? Does that sound like what's next for us?
I want us to move into it. And I want you to tell us a little bit of the lore around the name. So it's called First Thought, Best Thought. You named it, Amelia. Actually, it was kind of a tag team. You expanded the universe of it. So why the name and what is it?
Yeah. So I was introduced to the phrase first thought, best thought, basically in like brainstorming sessions. I don't know who first said this to me, but when I looked it up, it looks like it is kind of attributed to Allen Ginsberg, who has a book of poems called First Thought, Best Thought. And I think of this phrase as a permission slip to just kind of like throw your first thought out there without trying to perfect it or, you know, like make it really great in your head before you share it with other people. You're just like saying the first thing that comes to mind. We are pretending that your first thought is your best thought. And then in my version of this phrase, like, as a community of brainstormers, we like iterate and polish it together, and then it becomes the best thought. So I think that it's about giving ourselves permission to just like say the first thing that comes to mind and then let it evolve into the best version of our thinking, as opposed to feeling like inside our own heads, we have to like perfect it before it can even come out of our mouth. And this is a permission slip I need all of the time. So I thought it would be fun for us to kick off every episode of Thought of You with a sort of like first thought, best thought, where we each bring something kind of from our own lives that we just want to share with each other, share with listeners, and unpack a tiny bit before we get into kind of the topics that we will bring to the show and go through in every episode. What does first thought, best thought mean to you, Taylor?
Yeah, I love this idea. When we were thinking about what we wanted this podcast to be, and we talked about talking about what's in our world and on the internet. And first thought, best thought is a chance for us to just share what's going on in our mind, what's happening in our worlds. And I'm looking at the list of things that we want to talk about today. Obviously, we have personal thoughts, but it's a little less personal. So this is where we get to bring that personal touch in. And for me today, my first thought, best thought is about the idea of a year list. I started doing this last year, so this is only my second year doing it. And basically, I got inspired by Spotify's day list and how they would have these different moods. And I thought, okay, what if I was creating a year list? And for me, a year list is the soundtrack of your year. So I kind of tie it into my mantras or whatever word of the year I'm working with. And then I choose songs to support that. And what I really loved about using my year list for the first time last year is that when I was feeling a little bit out of sorts and I was like, this is not how I wanted to feel in 2024, I would go back to my year list, I would play it, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh yeah, this is what I wanted. And it's good. It has good music. So it got me moving. It took me on an emotional journey and also just reminded me what I wanted and the fact that I get to choose how I feel. So I'm in year 2. I have not fully completed my year list. I do have a few bangers on it right now. And I'm just enjoying this as a reflective process for how I want to feel in 2025. And yeah, trying to discover some new music along the way. So I haven't been as into, I think I'm going to really celebrate the new year in April. So this is my Gregorian New Year tradition is creating my year list.
Okay, I need you to tell me some songs that were on your 2024 year list. Like, what were some of the hits and highlights of the list last year?
Okay, so I started with an Andre 3000 song. I bookended it with instrumental music. I'm going to butcher the actual name, but the song about how he wanted to write a hip hop album and this came out instead. Last year, my personal mantra was trust and beautify. And so it's really about trusting the process. And I loved how Andre 3000 trusted his own process. Um, Another banger on there was Point and Kill by, I want to say, Lil Sims. And it's got like this great African beat. And it's like, if I want it, it's mine. And you can't stop me. And it's sounding really cheesy as I'm saying it, but it has an incredible beat. And again, when I'm listening, sometimes I'm listening to this because my year was going exactly how I wanted it to go. Sometimes I was listening because it wasn't going how I wanted to go. So having that little Sims reminder was like, oh yeah, if I want it, it's mine. I can choose right now on June 30. That's not an, I was going to say June 32nd, but on June 30th. To change my year.
If I want there to be a June 32nd, there can be.
There can be. Who cares about the Gregorian calendar?
Yeah, I love this. I feel like that mindset, though, is just like this perfect balance, right? Like sometimes we have to believe we can manifest anything, and sometimes we have to be the people like critiquing manifestation culture, right? Like we can do both, and we need both, and we need like hype songs for sort of each version of ourselves or what we need in the moment. So I love this so much. Maybe I will have to also make a year list. I tried to make a year list last year and I like utterly failed. My playlist practice is seasonal playlists. So I always like have a winter playlist, a spring playlist, a summer, and a fall every year. And the season starts for me whenever the new playlist needs to arrive. Like it does not have to do with anything happening in the world. It's like, okay, I have finished this group of songs and a new song has entered my life that needs to be the start of the next season's playlist. And it kind of always works that way. It's like something I've been doing honestly, like for 4 or 5 years now, maybe longer. And I love listening to old ones too. It's like very fun to see where I was. Sometimes a little cringe inducing to see where I might have been in a season a few years ago, but always a good time. Always a good time.
I love this. And I also personally appreciate your seasonal playlists when you do share them, because one thing about being friends with you is I'm gonna get some new good music out of it. I want to hear what your first thought, best thought is.
Yeah. So my first thought, best thought is also on the theme of like, it's a new year and how do we celebrate a new year? And this year, I think I'm just abandoning planning. I feel like to some degree, I'm like abandoning all of these ways I used to like be super intense about the new year. And the energy, my first thought, best thought energy I'm bringing is that just like, I don't care about New Year's anymore. I'm just like not here for it. It's like not landing for me. And I think that has to do with, I used to have a lot of reflection processes. Like over the past few years, like New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, I would do so much journaling. I would pull tarot cards. I would do a whole extensive process around the astrology of the year ahead. I would like write all these intentions for every area of my life. And it just got to be a lot. And I realized that I never paid any attention to them past like February. It was like 100% New Year's resolution culture. I was just doing it in this like more spiritual way. And so this year, I really tried to be like, what are the things I actually care about? Like, what has actually served me over the past few years of those practices? So I'm abandoning tarot card of the month stuff. I never look at it. I don't use it that way. That's fine. I did not do any journaling for the new year. None. Not a single journaling prompt or question for myself. And instead, what I'm kind of anchoring in, oh, I also am getting rid of word of the year because I'm just tired of, I haven't liked any of my words for the past few years. And it's just kind of like, I don't know, this doesn't mean anything to me. Like, I think I'm just in this space where I'm like, I'm doing all this stuff because I feel like I should. And I like believe it helps me, but I have no evidence in my own lived experience that it does. So the things I am actually doing this year, I am putting all of the new and full moons and Mercury retrogrades in my calendar. That is something I always look at. I have it in there. So I have some like astrological resonance and for my planning when I get to each month. And then the other thing that had really, really worked for me last year, I created a very clear list of priorities for the year. And I think, let's see, if I look at the whiteboard in my office next to me, there were 6 of them last year. And having a priority list actually worked super well. I think I did 5 of the priorities pretty okay. Actually, like 3 of them. But the ones that I really focused on, like it worked. Like my priorities for last year were saving to buy my house, giving more podcast work to my Softer Sounds team, growing Off the Grid, my other podcast, and reading books. Those four things I did so well, and I stayed so focused on them all year. But it's like if I wrap it in a sort of like vague intention, or I like distill it down to one word, I don't actually accomplish. Like I get lost in that. So there's something about I'm giving up all of my New Year's activities. I'm abandoning the planning. I have no plan for this year in my personal life or my business. I'm just working on this sort of like clear list of my priorities that I will develop over the upcoming weeks and months. And then also a little bit of like what's happening with the planets and do I want to commune with them in any particular way. But yeah, that's my first thought, best thought on I'm just not planning anymore. No New Year's, no new you, no new me, no new year. Nothing new right now, I think.
I'm curious, like let's put a pin in that. And I'm curious when we get to April if that changes at all. I totally hear you on I did some strategic planning in my birthday's in November and I did it earlier. And then I was just like, I have no desire. Matt and I sat in my living room and he did all of these goals and was so excited about it. And I was online searching for something for our living room because I'm redoing our living room. Like I just was not in that wavelength. So I feel you. And what I'm hearing is that it just sounds like a really sovereign approach where you are trusting what works for you and you don't need to buy into whatever is trendy. You've tried it and you're just being honest. There's something to be said for just being, BFFR, being for real with yourself of, yeah, I could do this, but is it actually helping me? Is it actually getting me what I want? Or do I just need to make a priorities list and then make decisions every day based on those priorities?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what has worked for me. I think there's something around just like being more present that is a priority or theme of my year this year. And I think some of that comes from like what we both know about our human design. Like I work best like in response to the things that are arising from within me or coming to me. And I found that when I try to like predetermine what I'm going to do for a year, it just always ends up feeling like a waste of time. And or not even a waste of time. Like I just forget about it. Like by June, I have no clue what I said I was going to do in January. So this year, I just decided not to bother with the saying it in January. And we will see what happens in June, come what may. So I love these thoughts on our 2025 planning rituals, whether they be playlists or priorities. But I feel like it's time to transition into our first sort of topic of the episode. So, because the show is brand new, to give listeners a little bit of context, what we're going to do in these episodes of Thought of You is unpack both and of like a topic and or an article that we sent each other over the past month. Something that we were really like sending those voice messages about, digging into. Often we have like slightly different opinions or takes or analyses of it, and we're bringing that to you here on the podcast. So today we have brought 3 topics, articles, trends that we're going to talk about. The first is ChatGPT, or as I put it in our notes, what the ChatGPT. We're going to dive into all things AI, generative AI, etc., and our takes on that from the past year and looking ahead into this year. Then we'll talk about Spotify, particularly an article that Liz Pelly published in Harper's about how Spotify, in my opinion, just rips off musicians. So we'll talk about that. And then our third topic will be this podcast that everyone has been listening to lately called the Telepathy Tapes that we have a lot of opinions about. So those will be the 3 topics kind of for this episode. We'll unpack them together. And if you have thoughts on any of these things now or as you listen, we would love to hear from you in the comments on Substack. You can find us at thoughtofyou.substack.com. If you subscribe, you can comment and join us in the chat. So anything else we should share, Taylor, before we dive in to our first topic?
I don't know. I think that's good.
Yeah.
I think that's what we know for now. Yeah. And y'all are going to figure it out with us. This is our first time doing it.
Beautiful. Okay. What the ChatGPT? Let's talk about let's start with how we're both using ChatGPT or other generative AI services, tools, apps. I don't even know what to call them. And then we'll talk about how we're not using them. So Taylor, what are like some of the ways you use ChatGPT in your work or your life?
Yeah. There's two big ways that I'm using it right now. And honestly, I keep being told to switch to Gemini instead of ChatGPT for the first one. So I mentioned in my intro, I'm in a PhD program right now. I am kind of a weirdo in that I'm doing it for fun. Like, I'm not entirely sure where it's going to take me in my career. I just am really appreciating having a structured learning environment and being around other people who really like to learn. And so, Amelia, bless her heart, and honestly, in my parents' heart, in my husband's heart, because we have been through a lot of topics, and I only share maybe 30% of the topics that go through my mind for a potential dissertation. And so I created a custom GPT for myself where I put my book, topics that I'm interested in, sometimes research agendas, and a bunch of prompting as well. And essentially said, like, these are the things that are important to me. These are the different research methodologies that I'm interested in using. These are some of the questions I'm interested in asking. And then as I read more, I'll come in and add. And what it's done is kind of reflect back to me. Okay, well, you're interested in conceptual metaphor theory over here, and you're interested in public pedagogy over here. Here are some ways that you could potentially put this into a dissertation topic. So that's been really helpful because it's just my brain is so used to going down the same neural pathways. And it's interesting to put the same inputs into this pseudo brain and see the different connections that it makes, again, while being really clear on what my own priorities are. And at the beginning, I think I was putting a lot of pressure on myself to figure out a dissertation topic sooner than I needed to. And we can get more into this later, but I was really wanting it to be this oracle to tell me exactly what to study. And now I've gotten to the point where I really have it give me reflection prompts. And so, yes, it might give some potential topics and et cetera. It still does that, but it gives me these questions of, okay, so if you're interested in this, why don't you think about, are you most interested in this research population, or are you more interested in this theoretical framework? What about this idea is exciting to you? And so with the questions that it's asking me, it's helping me get more clear. So that's one way that I'm using it right now. I'll pause here before I go into my other one, because I'm curious, as someone on the other side of a dissertation, what you think about the fact that I now get to use a GPT to help me in ways that you did not have.
Yeah, there was no, I feel like such a like, you know, boomer. There was no chat GPT when I wrote my dissertation. Like, whatever. That's fine. Yeah, it's interesting to hear, like hearing you say that. And I've also had other friends who are using tools like ChatGPT, maybe they're using Gemini or Claude or others to do this sort of work of like synthesizing information and presenting sort of like conclusions from like, if you combine this and that, what would be a good topic or a good question from this? Or if I've written this sort of like stream of consciousness thing, how might you reshape it into the like 10 most important points that I have put in here? And hearing all of that from you and other friends, like what it always brings up in me is that I feel like I went through 7 years of grad school to learn how to do that with my own brain. And so I don't really have like a value judgment about that. It's just it never occurs to me to go to ChatGPT to do that, because I think that what I learned in the process of all the reading I did for my dissertation was this sort of sense of like, now I can pretty quickly read anything and like figure out what the key points are, figure out what the framework is, and make connections and synthesize from multiple sources into like, here is what is most important to me among them. But it's interesting hearing you talk about how you're doing it, because when I was reading for my dissertation, like I came to all of it with a really clear idea of what I wanted to write. Like my grad school process was a little different than yours. Like I had 3.5 years of coursework before I ever had to think about what my dissertation topic is. So I was just kind of soaking in the sea of all of this philosophy I was reading. And then there was this sort of like personal excavation process of like, what did I like the most? What is my specific question? And then I went back to all the reading and read a lot more with that question in mind. So I was my own chat GPT, I guess. But I also just like had more time. Like your program is, I think, more professionalized and more accelerated than mine was. Like you're in year one, kind of moving toward a dissertation topic. That was not what I was doing at all. So it's kind of a different reflection. I don't know. What do you think about any of that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, and technically, I still don't have to decide. The thing is, the sooner I decide, the more like I did my research design and methods. And some people already came into the program knowing exactly what they want to research. So then they use the research design and methods class to basically write that part of their dissertation of how
Mm-hmm.
they were going to research. And then I'm doing scholarly writing. And some people, again, already know what their dissertation is. We have to write a lit review. They can just basically write the first draft of their lit review in this class. I am taking the pressure off of me to do that. Yeah, I think for me, what I appreciate most, because I'm reading, one of my friends was joking that there should be a Zotero wrapped of all the articles that you've read. And I only started school last semester and I have hundreds of articles. I haven't read all of them, but I've read or skimmed so many of them on so many different areas. And so when I start to get excited about something and I make my own connections, but it's almost more like a check of, okay, is there another way of connecting these things that I'm not thinking about? And is there a question I'm not thinking to ask? I think that's what's been helpful for me. And this is more supplementary because I also just like to do this with my professors and with my grad school friends of, okay, what does this bring up for you? But
Yeah.
I because I get so interested in so many things, it's nice to have a machine that I can bounce things off of and then only surface the things that I'm most excited about to actual people who have a limited time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because what was coming up for me as you were saying that is like that was the whole point of seminar. Like all we did was read the same things together and like present ideas and then see what like novel and interesting connections other people made from the things we shared. Like that was what we did in seminar. That's what we did at conferences. But I can see the ways that, I mean, so I think there's a both and here. Like I see the excitement of like, great, now I can, there is limited time with other people. I can bring all of this to this. And there's a part of me that's like, yes, but taken too far, it can become kind of like an antisocial thinking practice. And like to me, that's the opposite of the reason to go to grad school. Like you don't go to grad school just to like go deeper into your own thoughts and reading. It's like all about getting that sort of community of learning and being with the other people and seeing where their ideas take you. And so I think it's a both and. Like I think both can be great, but I do have some like concerns about what happens if we are like only going to generative AI to think through our ideas or like converse about these topics.
Yeah. And I want to hear you because I talked a lot about this. It's very top of mind for me. I want to hear how you're using it so then we can get into some of the other pieces, how we're not using it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I feel like I use ChatGPT like, you know how like everybody's grandma has an iPhone, but they only use it to call and text? Like that's how I use ChatGPT. Like I am not a custom a custom GPT couldn't be me, would never. Like I am not doing any of that stuff. I am literally the one going to like chatgpt.com and being like, make me a recipe from these three ingredients, or being like, summarize this link in 3 sentences. Like my usage of it is that my prompting is so elementary. And like I just use it when it occurs to me to use it. I have not really built ChatGPT or generative AI into any of my day-to-day practices. I did recently use it to like draft an email response to someone that I wanted to say no to, and I was like really struggling to say no. So I like put the email in and I was like, write a polite rejection to this email. And it did it. And then I rewrote it and it was great. Like I have used it a bit, but I'm really a dabbler. I have not gone deep. And again, I just think I'm like, it's like using an iPhone just to call and text. Like that is the degree at which I'm using it. The exception to that would be that in my podcasting work, at Softer Sounds, like we do use a program called Cast Magic for all of our client work. And that produces AI generated transcripts of all of the audio that we produce for clients. And it also drafts show notes and pulls quotes and things. And so I do kind of, I guess, use it to like bounce off of in that way. Like I share the transcripts with clients, and then sometimes I will look at the AI generated show notes to like as a starting point, but I also kind of don't because I don't really like them and I have some strong feelings about that more broadly. So those are the ways I'm using ChatGPT. It is so like again, it's just like very fundamental. I'm very like I don't even know if I'm 1.0 user. I'm like a zero point 0.5 user at this point.
I mean, so many people aren't using it, and so I think even the fact that you are using it, you're further
Exactly.
along than you think that you are. And what you were saying just made me think of another way that I have used it in the past, and it's only when it comes up. But I was building, man, this is probably a couple of years ago at this point. I was doing a lot of work with this nonprofit that works with principals, and I've never been a school principal. And so I was building out this workshop of mindfulness and leadership development, and I know all about that, but I don't know scenarios that would be specific to principals. And so I said, okay, here's this framework. I know I want to go into breakout groups and have them discuss a scenario. Can you build some scenarios using this framework that apply to principals? And then I used those as first drafts and talked with my liaison in that organization who could then say, actually, well, in this school district, it works more like this. But I just would not have known where to start. And it probably would have been very clear that I don't know about being a principal if
Hmm.
ChatGPT had not have helped me out. So that was a useful tool from a facilitation perspective.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I had never thought about like, I typically go to it to like refine a thought or like synthesize information that I theoretically kind of already have. But yeah, to like use it to access a data set that you have no lived experience or like information on, and one that's not easy to research. Like, it's not easy to just Google like popular scenarios for school principals. Like, what? I don't know. Who knows what would come up? So yeah, that's really interesting. It had never occurred to me to use it quite that way.
Yeah. And I think I felt comfortable doing it because I knew I was going to talk to a real person who would then say, yeah, this does make sense or this doesn't make sense. If I had not have had that check, I probably would have tried to find a real school principal to just make sure I didn't look like an idiot in front of all of these people, making them discuss these scenarios. So,
Yeah.
yeah, those are a couple of ways that we're using it then. Amelia's calling and texting on an iPhone. I feel like I've downloaded an app or two on the iPhone.
Oh yeah,
I'm
you're
not
doing way
like
more
when I
stuff.
hear what some people are doing, I'm like, oh, I'm not that far. I also I actively don't want to be overly dependent on generative AI. And that kind of leads us into how we're not using it. I think you, it was, this is, you didn't explicitly say this, but when we have talked outside of this conversation about astrology or really any meaning making system and how you can get overly dependent on it, how I can get overly dependent on it, how it can be limiting. And I see the same thing happening with ChatGPT, and I'm always constantly checking it. Is this a tool that I'm in charge of, or am I becoming dependent on it? And
Hmm.
so I hesitate to, and it's silly because it is called generative AI, but like I don't love having it right for me. Even though I have built a GPT to like build mantras for inner workouts newsletter. If I can't think of a mantra myself, it'll give me some ideas, but I don't like to have it right for me. That's a big way. I know a lot of people use it, but I I like to write and I like to put the words in front of the other one. So that's a big way that I'm not using it. I have experimented with some of the ways I see people using it on the internet. Like I'm a coach and a ICF credentialed coach. I've asked it to be my coach before and seen if I thought that was useful or not. Ultimately, I'm like, one of the big things of coaching is having an actual person to hold you accountable that AI still cannot do. So I'm not using it that way, but I have tried it. I feel like I'm very much yeah, I've tried these things. And ultimately, the ways I use it now, am using it right now, are the ways I think are helpful and are supplementary, not overshadowing what I want my brain to do because I like using my brain. How are you not using it, Amelia?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of my experience tracks onto yours there as well. Like, I rarely ask it to write anything for me. I am pretty happy if it can like synthesize or summarize things. But for me, the big way that I'm not using it, it's like actually become kind of a pillar of my business at Softer Sounds that like we are not podcasting by AI because tools like ChatGPT and other AI and algorithmically enabled podcasting softwares, whether that be like Descript or anything that's writing show notes for you, like the feeling I always get from them is that they're just taking everything to like the lowest common denominator and everything starts to sound the same and everything feels very just like basic. And I understand people here will say like, well, you can have a custom GPT and it can write these things for you. But I so often feel like I can spot AI written show notes a million miles away. There are these signatures of how they do things because of, I think, what these tools believe show notes to be. They like write them in this certain way. And I just don't think it's very interesting and it's not exciting. And over and over and over again, I watch my clients like create these amazing episodes and then sometimes use an AI tool to write show notes that makes their episode sound so watered down and basic to me compared to like the depth and profundity of like what I hear in their voice. I think that like in my experience of a lot of chat gpt it does like summarizing and synthesizing really well, but what it doesn't do is like find the most like interesting emotional moment and then write a great hook about that and then like explain to people why they should tune in and have your ideal listener in mind and exactly what they will gain from this experience. And so I just feel so burned and so annoyed by that. And every time it happens, I'm just like, no, your episode is beautiful. We all worked so hard on it. Like, let me write the show notes or like someone, a human being, write them. I think that, like, because for me, what comes up is like a generative AI tool can transcribe the episode, can sort of see the most important points, things that get mentioned over and over again or that are emphasized in certain ways. But it can't like it doesn't know what that evokes in a listener. And I think that like evocative piece is what's so important to me in podcasting specifically. And it's why I just feel like AI lets me down time and time again around this. And I think it's why like I feel confident as an editor and writer in the podcasting space that I won't be replaced by AI because like it doesn't have this like it can't listen like literally listen it can't listen the way that I can listen and my body can listen. So anyway, that's one way I'm not using it. I'm like not using it to like put out show notes or to be editing the audio of podcasts, but I also just think that similar to you again, like I'm not using it to create original thought. Like I'm never asking ChatGPT or something else to think for me. Sometimes I am perhaps asking it to think with me or refine my thinking, but I'm still like centered in my own thoughts and embodied experience before I am like I'm never asking ChatGPT the answer to a question that I don't know the answer to. Well, that's not quite true. I will ask it to answer like a fact for me, but I also know I can't really trust it to be like, I don't know, when was the Declaration of Independence signed? Like I could ask it that. But like if it's a question I actually have to think through, I'm not asking AI to think through it for me. I'm thinking it through for myself and then maybe using AI to like polish or add to that or ask a question about that. Yeah, that's kind of what's coming up for me around how I'm not using it.
Yeah. Another thing that just sparked for me too is it sounds like both of us aren't using it as a final draft. Like,
No.
and I think that's where a lot of people get into trouble with Gen AI is, okay, it wrote this thing. Now I'm just going to copy paste that. And any good writer, editor, like you play with it. And especially if it is this machine that just sucked up the internet and then spits it back out to you, yeah, you need to add your own spin on it if you decide you want to use it in any type of writing capacity. So, yeah, not using it as a final draft. Um, I feel like we're being kind of downers. So, let's
Always.
lift this baby up a little bit.
Yeah.
Is there anything that's exciting to you about generative AI?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely is. I love I mean, frankly, just like the time saving capabilities that it brings. I think that it can, not everything needs my unique and original brain on it. And I think I can outsource some of this stuff to ChatGPT to like write an email reply or, pull together, like summarize these like three links that a client sent me that I don't really need to read, but it can like do it in 30 seconds and tell me what they were high level about, right? Things like that. I feel like chat gpt or generative ai is great at, and it saves me a lot of time on the things I don't feel like need my original thinking or thought. I also just want to say that like I am thrilled that generative ai makes transcripts now. Like I can't even explain to you. I mean, I used to pay transcriptionists to do work for some of my shows, and that was work. The result was better than the generative transcripts that I get from these different AI programs, but it just saves so much time. And it means that I can just transcribe anything and everything. And that is so helpful, and it makes things so much more accessible, and it makes the information easier to access. I also love seeing like in Apple Podcasts, which is my primary listening app, like having the Apple generated transcript of almost every episode in there. I tend to like listen and read at the same time now, and my comprehension is so much higher when I am both listening and scrolling through at the same time. Like when I can see both and have it reaffirmed in these two different ways of taking in the information, like that's really useful and exciting to me, and I love doing that. And it's kind of unlocked a deeper relationship to some podcasts. Now, other podcasts I don't listen to anymore. I just go scroll the transcript and see if there's anything I want to know about, and then I never listen to the episode. So, like, sometimes it means I'm engaging less with the person, although other times it means I'm engaging more. So, those are a couple things that excite me about Gen AI. What about you, Taylor? What's exciting you about the Chat GPT universe we're all living in now?
I definitely have to plus one the transcription piece. It is, even the other day, I been working on this framework that I've been developing, and I had a long drive to a client, and so I just started recording on my phone my thoughts about this framework, and then when I was ready, I just put it in Cast Magic and had this whole thing. I talked for 30 minutes. I didn't have to painstakingly write everything down, and I mean, it's called Cast Magic, and it really felt like magic. So I do love that. Um, the thing that's exciting and I want to try more, you mentioned it offhand of like make a recipe if you have these three ingredients. I want to do more of that because my husband and I have some food restrictions, and also sometimes we just have these things in our fridge and know they could make something, but it's whatever it could make is not in our repertoire. So what would ChatGPT do? I want to do more of that in 2025. I think it could save me some time, but also just help us not throw out groceries that are perfectly good, but I forget to use.
Yeah, I really like bringing this up because I feel like there are definitely ways I could use ChatGPT in my personal life that would just like kind of save time on the tasks that I'm just like not that interested in spending time on. But I feel like I'm being sold ChatGPT as this like professional solution. Like I feel like part of the way people are getting the buy-in that this is like important and valid and legit is that like we all use it at work now. But I'm actually like you, a little more interested or excited about using it in some of those just like domestic things that I do, where I would love to spend 100% less brain power thinking about how to use the ingredients in the fridge, right? And I think that that's something that ChatGPT, which has read all of the recipes on the internet, could like do for me instead of me having to do. And then sometimes I want to like figure it out, and like I want to use my brain to do that, and that feels really good, but especially with these just like daily routines and tasks that I can find to be a little banal from time to time, I think that would be a great way to kind of implement some of this more in my life. And that excites me too. What, on the flip side of this, back to being a downer, because I like to be critical. What are some things that creep you out about ChatGPT or Gen AI? Because I definitely feel creeped out by it sometimes, but I'd love for you to kick us off. Like, what are some of the shadier sides of this for you?
Yeah, I'll start with a light one. I've started noticing that I'm getting traffic to websites from ChatGPT. It's just something, it's not a
Mm.
lot of traffic, but it started. And I don't know if it creeps me out, but it makes me really curious of like, were you putting something of mine in there and it pointed you there? Like what was happening
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
for you to then click from ChatGPT over to my website? So yeah, I'm just a little like, what's going on? Are you using my work? Are you trying to figure it
Yeah.
or reverse engineer something? Just email me. I would probably tell you. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's creeping me out a little bit. So that's my lower stakes one. What do you
Yeah.
think?
No, I think that makes a ton of sense. There's this way where it's like, what I'm feeling into there is it's like, what I like about even like Google search is that like I can use Google Search Console and it will tell me what people have searched for and found me for. But with ChatGPT or OpenAI, like I don't know. And it could be that they've asked a question that it has provided me as the answer to, and maybe that's cool in a search capability. But it could also be that they have gone in and be like, write a sales page for podcast editing packages exactly like insert my softer sounds podcast editing page here, except, replace the word feminist with whatever. Ugh, I wouldn't think about it. And like that, I would hate that. You know what I mean? That really, really creeps me out. The idea of how easy it is to just like scam and lift stuff now. And in ways where like the plagiarism becomes unprovable to some extent. Like obviously if somebody copy paste your website, you can be like, this is plagiarized. But if they like run it, if they ask ChatGPT to rewrite it, it just feels creepy. Like there's really no recourse I have there or proof that I can come up with. I can feel it. And like I trust that feeling if it emerges.
Yeah, and I think I had sent this to you way earlier this year. I don't know how I came across this, but someone had like downloaded all of the blog posts of their competitor, got some AI tool to rewrite it, and essentially stole a significant chunk of their traffic,
Mm-hmm.
take building on this labor that someone put in to build up all of that SEO, and then just in a snap. And that doesn't even creep me out. That's mm, disgust feels like a strong word, but it's definitely shady. It,
Yeah.
but I'm like, is it? Then I get into this theoretical, philosophical debate because I'm like, well, is it that different though? If I'm looking to see who's ranking for whatever SEO and then I put my blood, sweat, and tears, is it just accelerating what's already happening? So when I peel it back, I'm like, I don't know if it's morally wrong. We were doing something else, but at least it took time. There was something about it, like you putting in the elbow
Yeah.
grease to rank higher than me versus having a machine do that. And yeah, I hadn't named it that way before, so I'm kind of feeling into it.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think a lot of what's at stake in these questions is like, what is the value of human labor? And that is a very complicated question, and we can ask it from many different angles. And I also think, though, there's something to this around like something about kind of my of what I've started to think of as kind of personal aversion to a lot of these tools is just around, I guess, like what do we feel like is important to do ourselves? And sometimes the more people talk about Gen AI, it's like it feels like I don't want my job. It reminds me of the things I used to say about social media, where like I want to do my work. I don't want to like perform my work for social media. I don't want social media to become my job. Like I want to do my work. I don't want being good at Gen AI to become my work. I don't want that to be my job now. You know what I mean? So like when you write the blog post, now you have a skill that you have cultivated. But if you ask Gen AI, like ChatGPT to write it for you, the only skill you're cultivating is maybe better prompting ChatGPT, which is a skill. But I just wonder if, like, I have questions about how valuable or generative that skill itself is.
Mm.
And I think that writing is a valuable and generative skill and very translatable across all sorts of applications. Whereas I think like prompting ChatGPT is pretty specific, the way that like crafting a great Instagram post is very specific. And what does that mean? So yeah, it just brings up a lot of questions for me in that realm.
And that actually reminds me of one of the other things that's crept me out and actually was the inspiration behind us including this in the episode is this. I'm seeing so many people not want to write anymore. And this has
Mm,
come up in different contexts. In my professional life, in my personal life, in different parts of my professional life, where someone will tell me about how they needed to write, and so they just put it in ChatGPT. It's like writing in ChatGPT are now synonymous, and that creeped me out as someone who is a writer, likes to write. Just, are we gonna lose what writing gives us? Because even if you're not a good writer, the idea that writing is thinking is writing, are we gonna not be able to think? I sound so the sky is falling, but that does worry me because I'm seeing people say, oh, let's not write. Let's just put it in ChatGPT.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this worries me too. But of course, like, we are both writers and we both like understand ourselves and our ideas in the world through the process of writing and speaking and like articulating our ideas in words and then like reshaping and editing those words. Right. So yeah, it is. I don't know how I feel about it. Like, I don't feel like I have the sky is falling feelings. And at the same time, I am surrounded by people who put a ton of their life energy into writing. And so I don't think I'm seeing like the degree to which it might be degrading people's ability to have a thought of their own and to put it into words themselves. And that is, I think, definitely scary, creepy, shady, all of these things, especially when I think about a lot of our like wider political forces, right? Where it's just like, if we just believe the things the internet tells us, what does that mean for the future of the planet? I don't know. Okay, now I found my own sky is falling moment. Let me like grip the table and take a deep breath.
Welcome to the dark side.
Okay. Any final thoughts on ChatGPT, Taylor, before we move on to our next topic?
I will just say a big thing that creeps me out, and I honestly want to put a disclaimer, is I'm seeing so many people on Threads talking about, and I think it's on TikTok too, but I'm seeing it on Threads of people using ChatGPT as their therapist. And that is terrifying to me. I'm all for mental health care being accessible. I just really worry. I mean, we've already had someone have a relationship with a kid have a relationship with AI and end up dying by suicide. And I just worry what's going to happen, knowing the reality that we do have a shortage of therapists. And this is a machine, not a person, even if it sounds like a person, that your brain is too precious. Your mental health is too precious to outsource it. And I'm really concerned about the long-term ramifications of a sizable number of people using a machine for therapy. Yeah. And if that's you, like, I will seriously help you figure out some free or low-cost options in your area that would be more supportive than ChatGPT.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. And I think what was just coming up for me through all of this is like, what matters to me is like the embodied emotions that are behind every word a person says or articulates. And this is something I've always said about podcasting, that like what makes podcasting so different from writing is that when you speak things with your voice, you are bringing your body to the words. Like your body made those words. If you are saying them aloud, if your voice, they're coming out of your throat, like your body made them. And I think that's different than writing them down. And I think that when we go to ChatGPT, I mean, there are ways that writing can be embodied as well. I don't need to like set up a strong, like dogmatic dichotomy here. But I just think that as you were talking about mental health, and I was thinking about therapy speak and how the whole thing of therapy speak is it's just these like phrases and concepts that are empty of meaning. They're devoid of meaning. And I think that if we're not bringing our body to our words over time, they just become devoid of meaning. They have no context. They have no grounding in someone's lived experience. And all of this just really has me wanting to go like read some great poetry, because to me, that's where like we find the most emotion and embodiment in words. And I think it's like the medicine I always need. If I'm too online or too in the AI, like what I need is a poem, and that can bring me back to what I love about language and what I love about writing. And this connects to like the final thought I wanted to share on what the Chat GPT, which is also that, I think many of us have read, and we can put in the show notes some sources around just like how much water and other natural resources are required to run the servers that power these generative AI, machine learning computers. I don't even know what to call them, algorithms, programs. And it's a lot. And so I think there's this sort of tricky way that it feels like we're just like doing nothing on the internet, when actually like it does require natural resources to make this happen. And I think that that is going to come up more and more the more I guess like the more common this practice of like going to Chat GPT for everything is. And like that already is a factor, right? Like Meta and Google own so many servers and server farms, and they spend a lot of their money on paying for cooling them and building them and like the natural resources that go into that. So like it's already a part of our internet lives. But my understanding is that like generative AI requires even more of those resources. And as it is adopted, like even more widespread, I just think we're going to start to see actual, like even more so the environmental impacts of these digital technologies. And I think that that is, I don't know if it's something that creeps me out about AI, but it's just something that I have in mind as I like shift and think about my like digital practices for the years ahead. So that kind of perfectly takes me to our next topic. Are you ready to move on to topic 2, Taylor?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay. So our next section, topic segment is to Spotify or not to Spotify? That is my question. So we want to talk about Spotify primarily because of an article that was written by Liz Pelly in Harper's. It was published, I think, at the very end of December online and is in their January magazine. And it's called The Ghosts in the Machine, Spotify's Plot Against Musicians. So in the spirit of ChatGPT, I asked ChatGPT to summarize this article for me so I can recap it for all of you in 3 sentences. So here is what ChatGPT told me about Liz Pelly's article, which I do confirm from having read it. This is pretty accurate, at least in my assessment.
Yeah, we both read it.
Yeah, we did read it. We didn't like simply go to ChatGPT for this. So, but let me read the summary for you, lovely listener. Here it is. In The Ghost in the Machine, Liz Pelly investigates Spotify's, quote, perfect fit content, or PFC program, which allegedly populates playlists with tracks by pseudonymous, that's such a hard word to say, pseudonymous artists to reduce royalty payments. This practice involves commissioning music from production companies, leading to concerns about transparency and fairness in the music industry. Pelly's findings suggest that such strategies may financially disadvantage genuine musicians by replacing their work with cost-effective, anonymous tracks. Okay, so basically, my like addition, I think that's a kind of good summary of the piece, but like my additional analysis there would be like, I think Liz Pelly is trying to make the argument that like Spotify is ripping off musicians by like creating these Spotify sponsored-ish playlists, essentially like the major playlists on Spotify. They boost this music into those playlists that they have commissioned. So nobody is getting a payout when that music shows up there. And then they spend over time less and less and less. Like they're suggesting fewer and fewer artists, like artists that have not just been commissioned to do this work for very little. And so their costs go down, but quote unquote actual musicians have more and more trouble being found on Spotify, and they make less and less and less money there. Does that sound right to you, Taylor? What would you want to add about sort of the summary of the piece, or like what's at stake on Spotify right now?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good summary. And I wasn't thinking about this when we were framing this earlier, but it relates a lot to the Gen AI conversation, because essentially what the article says is they have access to all of this music. They analyze what people like about the music and how they think people are engaging with the music. And then they use that data, because we all love to get our Spotify wrapped. We know Spotify has a lot of data. They use that data to then create content that they don't have to pay people for. So it's very much this: people did creative work. We're going to put it all into a pot, and then we're going to deliver you a more generic version that is advantageous to us as a corporation.
Yeah, because we've just paid a musician to make it one time, seemingly not paid them very much to make it one time, and then Spotify never pays out royalties on it, and they kind of bump it up. And so part of the reporting in this piece, like the investigative reporting part of the piece, was getting confirmation that Spotify is prioritizing this quote unquote perfect fit content, which also, let me just say, they don't call it perfect fit music, they call it perfect fit content. And I think the content music distinction here really matters. And Spotify is basically trying to find ways to capitalize off of all of the data they have to create this sort of contentified songs that they then pump into their playlists and prioritize in those playlists. So they're paying out less money over time. And that's why we're all listening to these artists where we're just like, who is this a person? Like, how did this show up for me? I have never heard of this. They don't go on tour ever. I have noticed that really showing up in more and more of my Spotify suggestions and playlists over the past year. It's kind of like the new version of elevator music is perfect fit content, I think.
Yeah. And it's interesting just to think. So I've had Spotify since college, and the way that I used to relate to it versus the way that I use it now, and the emphasis, the different places where Spotify is placing emphasis. Like, I can remember when Spotify really started doubling down on creating their own playlists. And then for for musicians, you want to get on these playlists. You and I both love the show Rap Shit, which does a good job of, I mean, Spotify is literally a character in the show. It does a great job of kind of showing Spotify as what musicians hope will unlock their career. And now, like you said, we've confirmed that Spotify is saying that they're for the artist, but really they're about having this content. And something without knowing this that I've tried to be more intentional about is seeking out human curated playlists to make sure that I am listening to something that someone sat down and thought about, that are real. And I was going to say made by real humans. It's not that the people who Spotify is commissioning, not that they're not real humans, but even if you read the article, they talk about, they don't consider what they're making for Spotify to be their artistic work. And I feel like I just have a lot of thoughts about this, so I don't think I'm being particularly coherent. But what that sparked for me was this idea of playlists being the thing that we started to be taught to consume. I feel like last year, 2024, was actually kind of a renaissance for albums, where people started to see albums as a body of work and not just a series of singles. But the reason that singles got so popular was because Spotify, among other things, we can talk about Apple Music and buying singles, etc. But singles started to be the cash cow. Getting on playlists started to be the path that you were supposed to take. And then Spotify realized, oh, well, if people aren't engaging with the album as a body of work, then we can just sneak in whatever there. So what do you have to say to that, Amelia? Because I could just keep rambling about this.
I know. I have so many thoughts as well. I mean, one thought I have is just like how profoundly Spotify has impacted the music industry, but also like how music gets made and what music gets made. So I think about things like you're saying, like as it's shown in Rap Shit, like being featured on a playlist is everything. But also it's even more granular than that. Like I've seen people report on how songs have gotten shorter because Spotify plays by stream. And so it doesn't benefit you to have a bunch of long songs on an album, and having an album of 3 long songs is disincentivized than breaking that into even the same minute length of album that has, 10 short songs on it. Breaking tracks down into shorter pieces is more beneficial for a musician who's getting paid by stream. And so I think that there are ways that the mass adaptation of Spotify has shifted what is a single, what is a song, what matters the most. And there's a part of me that's like, I don't know that I need to like glorify the album over the playlist in terms of my like personal experience of music, but also like it's been interesting. I'm thinking on that, like in that direction, like something I think about is that like my partner has a very different taste in music than I do. So I listen to a lot of pop music and a lot of things that are just like 3-minute songs But my partner JJ really likes things that are much more ambient, that have way more drones, or like listens to a lot of like metal, like things that really tend to like where songs tend to take longer form. That was a weird way to say that. JJ listens to music where the songs have more minutes than the music I listen to. And so it's just interesting. Like JJ and I have such different relationships to Spotify because a lot of artists that JJ enjoys like haven't been on Spotify or weren't there because there's just no reason for them to be. Like they would never make any money there. Their music doesn't play there well. Like what do you do on Spotify with an album that is just one 45-minute song? Like experimental music is not benefited by Spotify in pretty much any way. And so it's been interesting to see our listening patterns shift. But going back to where you started, Taylor, like I have also been on Spotify for a very long time. I have playlists going back to 2012. So we're talking about 13 years of being on Spotify and constructing playlists. But I have noticed over the past 3 or so years that my pattern has shifted from making playlists all the time to searching for and listening to other playlists. Like Spotify has really shifted my relationship to music from being one of like actively seeking things out and constructing, like essentially just building mixtapes all the time. Like at first Spotify was just this like endless library for my mixtapes. And when I go back to 2012, there's also a lot more music on those playlists that I had uploaded to my computer and that Spotify was pulling from my library. And I never purchase and upload music anymore. Everything that I have in Spotify is streamed from Spotify. And typically if I want like to listen to something or like if I'm in a certain kind of mood, I don't build a playlist for that mood. I go search that mood and see what playlist Spotify has made for that and what they give to me. And I think that that's sort of like active listening and playlist construction versus like passive searching and playlist finding has been like a really defining shift in my music listening habits over the past 5 years.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's such a throwback to the fact that you could upload music at one point, and I was buying a lot more singles. And yeah, even sometimes in my Apple Music, like there are still albums that I will buy or have bought. We've been on a big record kick lately, and so if we're buying music, it's tending to be like, what are our no skips albums for different moods that like for New Year's Eve, we were DJing and playing different albums that we really love as Matt was setting goals and I was shopping for things that I might want for our living room in 2025. So yeah, you're right. Spotify in so many ways has really changed the game for everyone, for musicians, for record labels, for listeners, for cultural tastemakers. It's a different game now. And I think the question is like, okay, do we still want to play this game if the only person winning is Spotify? And I have a guess of where you've landed. For now, like I'm on a family plan that I don't pay for. And so I'll probably just stay on that and keep buying my records. And I was saying how I don't really have goals. One of the things I am trying to do is go to at least one concert a month. I went to a lot of concerts in 2024 and I loved it. It's something I want to keep doing in 2025. So that's another way that I feel like I can more directly support artists. So yeah, I'm not completely, if the question is to Spotify or not to Spotify, I'm still Spotifying with an asterisk of these are the other ways that I like to support the artists that I love.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've come to a different conclusion on this than you, and it's been very recent, and I want to share kind of like why. So I've decided to exit the Spotify streaming music ecosystem this year, by which I mean I'm just going to stop listening to music on Spotify. And Liz Pelly's article was a big part of this for me, but also honestly, I just feel like it was finally time for me to listen to my friends who are musicians who none of them use Spotify. They all stream with Tidal or Apple Music. And that has to do with how little Spotify pays artists. So I looked this up on the internets and I found a piece that I found an article that has a very tidy table of all of this. I don't think it's the most up-to-date information, but it does seem generally accurate. So like the difference between how much money is paid out per stream, Spotify typically pays out 0.003 to 0.005 of a dollar. So we're talking about a fraction of a cent. So to earn a dollar on Spotify, according to this research, you have to get like 228 streams. Whereas on Apple Music, they tend to pay out closer to 0.007 cents. A lot of places say they pay out roughly 1 cent per stream. So you only need 100 streams to earn a dollar. And so I think that just like Spotify pays so much less to artists, and Tidal actually pays even more, just over 1 cent per stream. So you only need 77 streams per dollar, or 77 streams to earn a dollar as an artist. And so it's kind of like, why wouldn't, like, if I'm listening on Tidal or Apple Music, I'm paying the artist 2 to 3 times as much for that stream. And that feels important to me. Like, I think that it is worth inconveniencing myself to leave the Spotify ecosystem to pay the artists I love double for streaming their work. And with the acknowledgement, like, I'm not buying every album that I listen to, and I don't intend to start doing that, right? Like, I would like to think about spending more money on Bandcamp. It's actually interesting to think through this. So because I was involved in the Chicago music scene for years and I DJ'd for Chirp Radio, I've actually purchased a lot of music by Chicago artists. When I go into my Bandcamp, it's like all albums from Chicago musicians that I loved. And to me, they were real people. So I was going to buy their album. Like, I was like, yeah, of course I'm going to support you. It costs $15. Like, I can download this for $7. Like, I'm going to give you this money. But it's also funny because I will still stream the music on Spotify. Like, I buy it and then I would put it in my playlist on Spotify and like do this. But I rarely buy music by artists I don't have a personal connection to in some way. If I haven't been to a concert or I haven't talked to them or like know them personally, I rarely buy their music. So I think moving to Apple Music is what I have decided to do because I'm already so deep in the Apple ecosystem on everything else, having a MacBook and an iPhone and all of this. And Apple Music will sync all of my listening across my devices, which I find very convenient. And it will integrate the music I actually own. So instead of just streaming things, like, I can upload files to Apple Music on my computer, it'll sync that across all my devices as well. So I'm trying to figure out this blend of like changing the streaming app I use, buying more music, also thinking about, I mean, I love what you said, Taylor, about going to concerts. I also love seeing live music. I just live in a place that has a lot less of it, or where people come through much less frequently. And so how am I investing in these artists? Like, now that I have Liz Pelly's article being like, Spotify is really doing everything they can to avoid paying artists, and I have the musicians in my life being like, Spotify is not paying us, I feel like it was finally time for me to like do something different. And for now, that is going to be using Apple Music. Okay, that was a long rant about my feelings. What comes up for you in response?
No, I like that we've landed on different places while realizing that the goal is to support art. Like, if we want there to keep being humans making music that comes from their soul, we have to find ways to make it feasible for them. I also think of, on the other side of things, the fact that musicians have power that maybe they don't acknowledge to operate outside of the system. For us in Chicago, Chance the Rapper was a big example of just being independent and having all of these mixtapes and still getting to a certain level of success. And then when he finally did have an album, it's like the work that everyone does not like. There are some bangers on there, but overall, not a good album. Right now, La Russell is doing something really similar in the Bay Area, and it's so community focused and is being independent. So I do think there's what can we do as consumers, and also what can musicians do. I remember talking to a fellow founder who is also a musician, and I thought that the way that publishing as an industry worked was a little bit predatory. And then he was telling me about like what his record deal had been. And I was just like, oh my gosh, why would you want to operate in a system that is so exploitative? So I think Spotify is definitely part of the story, but also overall the music industry. How can we make more direct relationships in the music industry? What is my role in it as a listener, and what is the artist's role? And I think it gets a lot easier for artists to feel comfortable operating out of the system if they know that they'll be supported.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a good place to like shout out the United Musicians and Allied Workers Union, because there is a union of musicians trying to basically like force Spotify to negotiate with them. Maybe force is too strong a word, but like trying to unionize within and against Spotify. And so we can link that in the show notes. Like they have days of action, they have like requests and demands that they take to the Spotify offices. And I think that that work is really powerful and important and is actively happening. And also, what you're saying, Taylor, is more so speaking to like, what is the creative, as artists, what is the creative thinking we can do outside of the systems so that our music gets made and shared? And one of my favorite Chance the Rapper albums is still not on Spotify, which is the first Christmas album that he did. It's not there. You have to listen to it on SoundCloud or YouTube.
Yeah, he has a version of it, but the best song is not on the Spotify version.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you got to listen on SoundCloud, even though I'm looking at this chart and SoundCloud actually pays really terrible royalties. It's actually the worst, actually the second worst after Pandora. So, only support SoundCloud to listen to Merry Christmas Little Mama by Chance the Rapper and Jeremiah.
Yeah. And I think that also has to do with, though, like the function of SoundCloud has, it like started for different reasons. It was never trying to like collect all music and make all people listen on SoundCloud. Like a lot of like when I first used SoundCloud, it was just about like getting your music player so you could put it on your website. Like it had a kind of different function, and it's not trying to capitalize off of musicians in the same way, which I think leads to like why the royalty system is lesser and different there. So we will link that Chance the Rapper album in the show notes and all of the other things and pieces of this. But yeah, I'm intrigued to see what comes for music listening and these different choices. And I think it's also like my last thought on this that's important to say is that I still intend to use Spotify around podcasting. So while I am moving my music listening to a different app, and we'll put a link in the show notes to there's a great tool, a different app that actually just allowed me to totally transfer all of my playlists and music from Spotify to Apple Music. So I don't have to rebuild anything. It was just transferred through this app. So we'll link that in the show notes if folks are interested. But while I move all my music listening to Apple Music from Spotify this year, I still will like have a Spotify account and use it to review and share podcasts, because all my podcasts are on Spotify since it's become such a major player in the podcast ecosystem. And I'm still a holdout. I use Apple Podcasts. It's my preferred listening app for sure. I'm also a big fan of Pocket Casts. That's what I recommend for all Android users out there or other non-iPhone users. But I feel like I still have to be invested in Spotify to some extent because of how prominent podcasts are there as well.
I think I'm reading your mind.
Oh, you're reading my mind? Is this a little bit of telepathy?
Yeah. I think we should talk about telepathy tapes.
Yeah, I think we absolutely should. Okay. Taylor, weeks ago, you popped into our Signal chat and said, "Hey, have you listened to this podcast?" And actually, you probably just sent me the link because you're the queen of no context links. You're always just like sending me things and I'm guessing how you feel about them. So
you're like, do we like this?
Yeah, I'm like, I don't know. Especially with this one. Let me tell you, when I saw the telepathytapes.com show up in our Signal chat, I was like, who knows how we feel about this? So will you tell our lovely listeners, what are the telepathy tapes? What is this podcast?
Yeah, the Telepathy Tapes is a podcast. Right now, it's a limited series. I think it's 10 episodes, and it is all about this. I would say she's a podcaster. I don't think she's a journalist. I think she's a documentarian.
I'm going to say documentarian. Yeah, she makes documentaries.
Yeah, and she is looking at this idea, this belief that nonverbal people with autism are having these telepathic connections. They're able to read people's minds. And I think, how did I get into this? I had multiple people. I think it was 2 people within 24 hours in different contexts, one professional, one personal, who said like, this podcast is crazy. You need to listen to it. And I have people with autism in my family, no one that's nonverbal. And my mom works for a nonprofit that works that supports people and families with all types of disability. And so it's a topic that I'm interested in. And then the kind of telepathy aspect of it was also interesting to me. I started listening. I felt like they were making what I felt to be a pretty strong argument. And I am a kind of person, empathy is one of my strengths. It's really easy for me to put myself in someone else's shoes and to understand where they're coming from, which means that I don't always critique things as much as I could. So I was like, who is my critical friend who's going to look at this differently than I did? Amelia, put it in the chat. No context. And that's where you came in.
You're like, thought of you. Saw telepathy, thought of you. Did you hear it? Did you notice? Was that a telepathic thought? Yeah, okay. So you sent me this podcast and I had seen it on the Apple charts. So I just want to be clear for listeners, like this show has been #1 on the Apple podcast charts, like of all shows at different points in December. And so I had seen it there and I'd been like, what is this? And I never really explored farther. And then Taylor sent it to me and I was like, well, I guess I have to listen now. And Taylor, you were listening being like, wow, I feel this. I am like tuned in. I am on board. And I pressed play and I was like, absolutely not. My like inner skeptic was on high alert. And I want to be clear. I was on high alert, not because I don't believe telepathy can't be real. I'm actually like pretty open to this idea of telepathy, but I was not open to this producer trying to convince me and how she was trying to convince me. So I'm curious, Taylor, like, can you walk us through like what was some of the like how she presented evidence and like this question around it and like what convinced you, like what had you on board? Because you sent me a message that I'm quoting here said, I just finished the first episode and I am floored. And then you were like, I want to hear your skeptic perspective. So tell me like what floored you? Like what really made you buy into this?
That's a good question. I think it was the storytelling, the way, and it's funny because you're going to basically, I just bought into what she was doing and you're going to tell me what she was doing. But the way that she was presenting the story, I said this earlier in the episode, I'm in the midst of getting too handsy. I'm in the midst of my PhD program. I just took a research design and methods class. We're talking a lot about quantitative, qualitative, how you structure things, how you quote unquote prove things in academia. And so hearing her talk about, okay, this is the way that it would need to be structured to be considered credible, but also giving voice to these people who have been voiceless, who I've had different levels of engagement with people on the autism spectrum. So I think there was some of it of my own personal experience, some of the hearing of, yeah, this is true. There's a lot that's wrong with how academia approaches proving things, how science approaches proving things. And they call them kind of tests in the show. And the tests that they started to do in the first episode were really compelling enough for me to keep listening. And I'll stop there for now.
Yeah.
What was the experience you were having? Because it was a very different experience.
I mean, so for listeners trying to follow along who haven't heard this, basically like in the first couple episodes, our host of the show, I think her name is Kay, maybe?
Kai.
Okay, Kai has like met with this like Harvard trained psychotherapist or MD in psychology, I believe, who has been doing research with these different people on telepathy. And Kai has, in the first couple episodes, like meets with these parents and their kids who are the nonverbal people with autism. And basically, like they kind of, with the doctor, develop these sort of experiments or tests to try to prove that telepathy is happening. And one of the most common ones throughout the episodes, or the first few episodes, is having the like parent and child separated at the very least by a partition, sometimes by rooms, and then showing the parent a number on like an iPad, like a random number generated number, and showing it to the parent, and then asking the child, like, what was the number? And the kid getting it right. And basically they're saying that this is proof that the kid has read the parent's parent's mind, because there's no way that this kid could have seen this number or known this number. It was randomly generated. It was never said aloud. It was only on the screen. They couldn't see, but they knew it anyway. So that's kind of like, there are other tests, other experiments, other things happening, but that is like, becomes like the proof. And you hear it on the podcast, but they also have videos on the website, and you can pay, I think it's $10. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
$10. You can pay $10 to watch the videos and kind of see for yourself. So that is what's happening in the first few episodes. It definitely like takes a different turn later on, but I think that's kind of basically the first three, what we're uncovering with different sort of subjects of these experiments or tests. And Taylor and I both were like on Reddit being like, are the videos real? Do they prove anything? And people on Reddit, some of them are like, this absolutely proves it. And others are like, I am so unconvinced. That is so not proof of this. But I think that for me, what this podcast really made me aware of is the like subtly manipulative ways we get people on board with our point of view. Because the host really, like in the first couple episodes, sets up science, like basically to say that like science is ignoring the fact that telepathy is happening. So there's this like critique of science happening, but also an appeal to using scientific methods to prove that this is real. So at the same time, the host is asking us to believe in and not believe in science. And that is actually something I'm on board with, but very hard to do. It is hard to prove something through science when you are undermining science itself. And I think what ends up happening is a lot of things that are very anecdotal and unscientific get presented as scientific fact because of how the producer has undermined science, but then like claims that these are scientific experiments. And I just think a lot of things they do, like that they'll say over and over again, like, this is so unbelievable. How is this not everywhere? How does not everyone believe this? Why don't they see the proof, the proof, the proof? And I'm just very skeptical. Like that to me makes me feel like the producer is trying to manipulate me by setting up this sort of like straw man of science and then like using a straw to take down science. I'm like, this is not, this doesn't work for me. And also, I think a lot of things they do, I'm like, of course scientists wouldn't accept this experiment. Like you literally did this with two people in their own home and a video camera that you rigged. And like the producer does things like, I brought on my video producer on board, who is the most skeptical person I've ever met. And like they present this, so we just believe them. But also I'm like, I don't know you. I don't know this person. You could have literally paid money to this person to say these things. But because I think of the power of podcasting and the power of the voice, we just believe it. We're like, oh my gosh, this super skeptical person believes that this is true. So even if I'm skeptical, I can believe it's true because they're skeptical, right? Like, I mean, it's a very smart production, let me say. This is like a masterclass, I think, in sort of manipulative production. But I don't like that. Again, I am happy to have a conversation about like, is telepathy possible in a different context? But I think that the way this podcast is going about quote unquote proving it is pretty problematic.
Yeah, and I actually told you, I was like, you can stop after episode 3 because I felt like the first 3 episodes were really trying to say, the first episode was like, science doesn't believe this. The second episode was, okay, here's a subject that science would accept. And so there's that tension that you're talking about of like, science, and then, okay, here science would accept. And then the third is kind of rounding that out. And then from there, I don't want to spoil anything for people, but it really gets very spiritual and more anecdotal. And to be clear, because we've talked about Amelia having a PhD, we've talked about me being in my program right now. Amelia and I are both critical of the way that science has almost become a religion for people and how people get very dogmatic. So this is not like, this is from people who believe in the science of vaccines and also believe that like the point of science is to find out new things. And so if you get too stuck of science is how it is now, that's a problem too. And also the way that they set things up, I think it took me longer to see the manipulation more clearly because after a certain point, it was like, oh, all of this just dropped off. And I I think we've hit home the point that we didn't love how it was produced. We are both open to the idea of telepathy being real. And
Yeah. So I'm like, what do you believe about telepathy, Taylor? Like,
yeah,
aside from this podcast or after listening to it, I don't know. But like, what's your take on telepathy now?
yeah, I think telepathy is real. I think we all have different sensitivities to it. Um, but and that they do actually mention this in the podcast. We do have this sense of people, oh, someone's watching me or this thing. Like we've all experienced versions of that. I also will say I am a very sensitive person, and I have only recently started working with a therapist where we do a lot of somatic stuff, which is making me realize I'm actually more sensitive than I thought I was. And I distinctly remember in college, like being in a room and feeling what was happening with people and knowing that people were not saying what they actually felt. And it was like this oppressive burden on me that I
Mm-hmm.
could feel all of these people wanting different things, but everyone's just like smiling and looking down and nodding. And I realized, like, oh, everyone does not feel that in the way that I do. So I'm not saying that I'm telepathic, but I do know that I have a higher level of sensitivity to people in some ways. So it makes sense to me that other people are communicating and picking up on things that I don't have the sensitivity or the capacity for. So that's kind of my thought on telepathy. What about you?
Yeah, I feel like so something that struck me from the podcast. I did a lot of just like bashing on it, so I want to say something positive or something I took away that I thought was interesting. Um, all the examples that they use, many of them from the early episodes, are quote unquote telepathic experience between people who know each other and have built relationships. And so to me, I do think there are these ways that we come to relate to each other where you feel like you can read somebody's mind. I mean, Taylor and I all the time are being like, I was just thinking about that when you texted me. Like I feel like we are attuned to each other. And I love using like metaphorical language, like we're on the same frequency, like we have the same vibe that like maybe is more literal than I realize. I think often we will use these metaphors and then eventually it will turn out based on the science or otherwise that like that was actually true, right? Like we can be on the same frequency. We can like have different be riding a different wave than the people next to us. Like there are ways that I think we can share experiences that may feel telepathic. I think another thought that I had coming away from this show was really just about how I actually think like telepathy is a really kind of limited way to understand any of this. Like, I'm actually not that interested in like someone being able to quote unquote read my mind, right? Like, I'm not walking around being like, I'm thinking of the number 76. Who can understand I'm thinking of the number 76? Like, I just don't think thoughts are quite that like literal and discrete at all times. And I don't think that people are necessarily just like we I think we often think of telepathy like you've literally like opened up someone's skull and read the book that's in their brain. And I just don't think that is interesting to me, or like I don't think that's the way it would work. I think that humans do have much more cognitive and somatic capacity than we can understand or than science could at this point in time like prove or justify with evidence. And I'm interested in the examples of humans and people who have a different lived experience than I do, a different embodied experience, a different cognitive experience than I do. And I'm pretty open to hearing from them what makes that different. I'm just not open to being convinced by a podcast producer that like everything I know about the world is wrong because this person read this other person. Like, I'm just not interested in like, I guess, the production around that. But yeah, I think that like, can we know things without any evidence for how we know them? 100% absolutely. At least not scientific evidence. Like, I'm totally on board with that.
Hmm. Yeah. What this is just, as we've talked about this both on the podcast but also outside of this in our Signal chat, there's something to me about the difference between sitting with someone and hearing their experience. And I personally know people who have had physical and metaphysical experiences that I have not personally had, but I have this relationship with them and I can ask them, okay, what is that like? what's happening there versus what happened in this podcast and what happens in science and what happens. I was raised an evangelical Christian. In religion is the thing that turns me off, and it sounds that like turns you off as well, is the dogma that I need to convince you this is the way. We both seem to be leaning more towards like a relational way of understanding telepathy. It's probably out there.
Mm-hmm.
I did ask someone, one of the autistic people in my life. I was like, "Hey, have you been to the Hill?" They did not know what the Hill was, but they're not nonverbal, so they may not have access. But yeah, I'm much more interested in having relationships to learn about other people's experience than convincing or being convinced that this experience exists and I must believe it exists because you told me so. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I really think a way you could just like sum up this entire episode is just like relationships are in for 2025, right? Like ChatGPT, cool, but you better talk to other human beings. Spotify, great, whatever, but you should probably find some way to get some money to musicians. Telepathy tapes, who knows? But being in relationship with other people probably means you're more attuned to them than not, and you might feel like you can read their mind sometimes, right? I just feel like all of this is coming back to relationships, which is like such a theme of everything that I'm seeing and doing, like in my professional and personal life, just trying to respond to how hard life and the world feels these days by like rooting even deeper into relationships with people I've known for a long time and people I'm just meeting, and like how can we do this together? Like, that's kind of what I'm taking away from everything we've said today. Do you have any reflections or takeaways from this?
I feel like that's just such a beautiful way to end it. I mean, this podcast is built on our relationship, and I'm seeing something similar in my own work and leaning into doing a lot more in-person and virtual relationship building, including in this space and thought of you in 2025. So that just feels like the perfect way to end it. I think we did it. We got through our first episode.
We did it. Go us. We even took up a Joe Rogan length amount of time. I'm so proud of us.
I didn't know if we could do it. I honestly did not know if we could do it.
I know, because we're both such like concise, succinct thinkers and speakers. I was like, oh no, we're going to run through all of this in 35 minutes. Oh my gosh. But here we are. If you, dear listener, are still tuned in, thank you for listening. We are absolutely thinking of you. And we would love if you would head to the comments in Substack and let us know what you're thinking about. Let us know what links you are texting your friends or voice messaging about over time. And also let us know if there's anything you want our opinions on. I'm pretty happy. I don't know how you feel, Taylor, but like I'm happy to crowdsource. If there's like an article, everyone's like, what do Taylor and Amelia think about this? I'd be happy to add it to our list for our monthly episodes. So put those links in the comments. We would love to hear from you. Bye. We're thinking of you until next month. See you later.